Well, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones again with sphistory.com, and we are continuing with our Chauncey Holt and the Three Tramps series. This is episode 2. And if you have had the opportunity to view episode 1, I tried to lay the groundwork for Chauncey Holt's future, going back into his backstory a little bit, talking about his days being raised in Kentucky uh, as a bootlegger. So he was an outlaw from day one. He served time a couple times. Both of the uh, prison stints led to future connections, especially the second one, where he met the Bloom brothers from Baltimore. Bloom brothers ran a bookmaking operation for Meyer Lansky up in Baltimore. So after he got out, uh, they took Chauncey with them to Baltimore to work with them. They got him a job first at a shipyard, and then he worked with them in his off hours. And it was during that period of time that they discovered that this guy Chauncey had quite a skill when it came to math, numbers. And of course, bookmaking is all about numbers. So they passed the word up the line to Meyer Lansky, who would visit periodically from Miami, and partly for personal reasons to visit his son, who had cerebral palsy and was in a home nearby. I think it was Boston, and then other partly because he was coming to oversee his bookmaking operation, check in with things. And it was during one of those visits that the Bloom brothers introduced their star recruit, Chauncey Holt, to him and told Meyer that this guy was a genius when it came to math. And of course, Meyer Lansky was all into numbers too, and very intrigued by anybody else who might have a similar interest, similar skill set. He gave him a test, gave him a question that he thought would trip him up, or at least he thought if this guy's the genius they say he is, he'll catch on to the trick. And of course, he did. Um, it was during this time also that he had honed another skill, which was painting. And of course, this goes back even into his childhood. And again, as a result of his prison stints, he met another mafioso, another figure that was in organized crime from Detroit named Peter Licavoli. And Peter Licavoli uh, had an immediate affinity for Chauncey Holt because of his skill set when it came to painting. Peter Licavoli, again, had personal interest in painting. Um, According to Chauncey, Licavoli bought up every bit of Italian art he could find, get his hands on, filled up his whole mansion with all this fancy Italian art. So he found somebody, another kindred spirit. But then, more importantly, at least as far as is concerned, if you have a painting skill, you can you can contribute to organized crime and their forgery outfits or counterfeiting outfits, forging documents, et cetera, et cetera. So these two skill sets put Chauncey in in good standing with organized crime. Now remember, he's this is just life as this is normal operating procedure for Chauncey Holt. This is life as usual. He grew up an outlaw, bootlegging in Kentucky. So this isn't anything new. You're an ex-con. You're living on the fringes of society anyway. So he's making a really good living. Excuse me. Helping Meyer Lansky's outfit in Baltimore and also helping Peter Licavoli and maintaining throughout a 50-year relationship. As it, before it's all said and done, he will have had a 50-year relationship with Peter Licavoli and a nearly 30-year relationship with Meyer Lansky. So clearly, eventually Meyer Lansky invites him down to Miami with the pretext he's going to teach him this new calculus, that he doesn't quite understand. He figures he's met somebody who does understand it. He can be his tutor, his personal tutor. Really, what he's doing, he's recruiting him into his outfit. And he sees he has big plans for Chauncey. And of course, we went into, I showed you a letter that he had written right before he went back to Israel, Meyer Lansky. And he addressed it to Chauncey, and he thanked him for all the past favors. He wanted to see him again. And we went into some of those favors, and we talked about the dealings with uh, Bugsy Siegel out in Nevada, out in Las Vegas, and how it was Chauncey and Meyer who put together the scheme that Bugsy had to steal money from organized crime figures who were sending it out to Las Vegas ostensibly to build the casinos. Bugsy was stealing it, a lot of it, and they confronted him, and he blew him off. And so Chauncey admitted he was part of the hit team. The next day they took out Bugsy Siegel, and that was sort of the beginning, as far as Chauncey Holt recollects, of his taking the next step in organized crime up to and including killing people. He didn't pull the trigger, but he was personally involved in the reconnaissance, setting up Bugsy Siegel to be hit. And there were other personal favors, and eventually Meyer Lansky placed him, his man, inside the IRC, the International Rescue Committee, which Chauncey naively thought was a charity organization, an international charity organization on behalf of the United States government. Turns out it was a CIA front, and Meyer, having had a more than decade-long relationship with the CIA, had the influence to place his man inside the IRC as the controller. And from that point forward, Chauncey had a new boss. It wasn't just organized crime. It wasn't just Meyer Lansky. It wasn't just Peter Licavoli. Now it was the CIA. And from that point forward, you're going to start to see a shift in Chauncey's work record. You know what he's doing. He's now more or less helping the CIA. Of course, the CIA is in business with the mob, and so he's kind of spread himself thin, working for both masters, serving two masters essentially, but really only serving one because the CIA gave the marching orders to the mob. And later, when the Cubans get involved, the mob gives the marching orders to the Cubans. So there's a pecking order as far as the hierarchy is concerned. The CIA's at the top, the mob's in the middle, the Cubans are at the bottom. And he's working for the CIA. His introduction to the CIA came through the mob. That was the liaison. That was the middleman that got him in with the CIA. And of course, he has, by this point, some real marketable skills. In addition to the painting, in addition to the math skills, he also has been trained. He was in the United States Army, the USAAF, the United States Army Air Force, before he got kicked out, essentially. And he learned weapons training. He knew everything about weapons. He knew all the different kinds of weapons and how to use them, et cetera, et cetera. So he had experience with weapons, and he'd been trained as a pilot. So those are four really marketable skills. And of course, also the fact that he's coming from a background, having grown up as an outlaw, bootlegging in Kentucky. This guy was steeped in all things related to organized crime. And of course, an argument could be made, I think a very valid one, that the CIA was involved in all things related to organized crime as well. They were their own organized crime outfit. So he was at home with his people, whether it be CIA people or organized crime people. And we talked in the last episode about the next step for him was being recruited by the CIA to help with different overseas operations. In 53, 54 is Guatemala. And then right on the heels of that, he was part of the assassination team, take out Trujillo. And then later, the issue becomes Cuba. And of course, once you get to Cuba, that folds into all these, what might have started off as separate organizations, and the CIA, the mob, and the Cubans. By the time you get to Cuba, they're all working together. And I would argue they were working together prior to that. And of course, they were. History shows that the mob and the CIA were working together during World War II. In the invasion of Sicily, for example. But that's another story for another time. Today we're going to continue on episode 2 And of course, I title this series the three tramps because Chauncey Holt is the key to understanding the story of the three tramps. And anyone who knows anything about the JFK assassination certainly has seen the photo of the three tramps being marched through Dealey Plaza. We will eventually get to that. I was telling the backstory of Chauncey Holt, and we that will be the culminating event, so to speak. So, but we are now to 1963, and this is the pivotal year. Um, all of these goings on with respect to Castro started in 60 and have now bled from the Eisenhower administration, where the CIA had the full backing of the federal government, executive branch, president, now to a new president, JFK, who started off as backing all of these Operation Mongoose things that were going on, led by William Harvey and the CIA. But as a result of the Bay of Pigs and a few other spectacular failures, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, et cetera, Kennedy has changed his mind. And Kennedy now all of a sudden is not as gung-ho about Operation Mongoose. He's not as gung-ho about getting rid of Castro. And so that's going to prove to be a big problem for all these forces that want to get rid of Castro. So this is beginning Holt's third big shot, his third big operation with respect to the CIA. And the date is April 23, 1963. And this is the first news release that JFK will be going to Texas, and included in that Texas trip will be a day in Dallas. There's no real particulars released. It's just the fact that he's going. This is about the same time that JFK was trying to finesse the Cuba thing. He had gone down to the Orange Bowl in Miami and publicly promised all the Cuban anti-Castro Cubans down there, all the exiles, 40,000 people in that stadium. And he gives this big speech, and he promises that the flag of the exile brigade will be flying over a free Havana before the end of his second term. So essentially what he's saying is nothing has changed, okay? After Bay of Pigs and after Cuban Missile Crisis, my promise to you is still the same. Castro will be gone. You guys will go home, and Cuba will be free again. And they all cheer. It's a big thing. And that's his public promise that he's making to the anti-Castro Cubans, which would include all of the agencies and the organizations like organized crime and the CIA that are invested in this effort. But secretly, behind her back, he's negotiating through an emissary or a back channel, a man named William Atwood and a woman named Lisa Howard. They're back channeling these peace negotiations with Castro, trying to normalize relations between the United States and Cuba. Now, where this becomes a real problem, as long as it stays secret, he might be able to maintain this forked tongue approach, so to speak. But the CIA found out because they had bugged Atwood's phones and Lisa Howard's phones, and they were surveilling them. And Atwood and Howard had no clue to be discreet. And so they were just talking to each other and comparing notes and talking about what Kennedy was sending them to do or sending them to say to Castro, et cetera, et cetera. So the CIA found out. And I'm sorry, I got a bug in my throat. The CIA did what the CIA does. They sabotaged the peace efforts. I mean, this reminds me of when Oswald was sent to Russia, right? People think, well, it was to do this, to do that, He was sent to sabotage a peace effort. There was a big summit coming up between Eisenhower and Khrushchev. It was going to take place in Paris. And they needed an international incident that would force Khrushchev to cancel the peace summit. Understand, there are forces, there were then, there still are now, forces in America that want to keep us in a perpetual state of war. Back then it was the Cold War. Same thing in Russia. You had the same thing going on. So the CIA sends Oswald over with his knowledge of the U-2. 6 months later, right before the Paris Peace Summit, Francis Gary Powers' U-2 plane goes down. Now, that plane had been unfreaking touchable up till then. It flew too high. It was too fast. It was beyond the, the speed capabilities of the Russian planes. It was beyond the height capabilities, elevation capabilities of the Russian Air Force. They had radar jamming equipment. It was impossible to see. And they knew it was flying over Russia, taking pictures. It frustrated them to no end. But until Oswald came with his expertise from the U-2, from his days at Atsugi, and gave up the military secrets, they had no way to shoot down that plane. 6 months after Oswald shows up, they shoot down that plane. Pretty interesting interview I saw with Francis Gary Powers, where he tells the story about how it was Oswald that gave him up. And that created, of course, that was a big public event, created an international incident. The United States initially said, no, we don't, that was a weather plane that got lost. And of course, they had the plane. The Russians had the plane. They had the cameras. They knew it was a spy plane. So it creates this international incident, forcing Khrushchev to make a big stink about it. And he leaves the Paris Peace Summit. And the Cold War continues. That was the whole point of that. That was the operation. That was why he was sent, right? Well, here's the CIA, fast forward to 63, decides, okay, this time it's not Russia, this time it's Cuba. But our president's trying to negotiate normalized relations with Cuba, so we need to do something quick to forestall that or to sabotage those efforts. And so they decide to come up with a false flag operation that can be blamed at Cuba. It's going to be, we're going to create a disturbance in either Miami or Dallas while the president is there, because the president was going to Florida first and Texas second. And we're going to lay it at the feet of Cuba. It's going to be a false flag. The American people will be so furious that this disturbance or whatever, be a threat to our president, whatever happened, and the Cubans were responsible for it, that it'll justify, at the very minimum, it'll justify hostilities continuing between our countries. And if we're lucky, we might get a war. They've been angling for this war with Cuba for the last 3 years. So they put together this team, and it's led by Chauncey Holt. And he's ordered by his CIA boss. We'll talk about Philip Twombly here in a minute. His job in this operation is to forge ID documents, Secret Service IDs, and badges. The lapel pins that go on their jackets, but also the badges that they flash. And that's, you remember, they had one of the Operation Mongoose responsibilities that Chauncey Holt had when he was recruited into this Operation Mongoose by William Harvey, was to create a document mill. They bought that firm in Los Angeles on the 4th floor of that stamping company, which, you remember, one of the reasons they bought that stamping company because it produced ID badges and IDs and badges for all of the police departments across the country. And so they already had the capacity there to do this. That's why they bought that company. The other one was the weapons. They needed a milling shop, or what do you call it, tool and die kind of an operation. They bought that and set that up on an airport out in California where planes could taxi right into the hangar there and make deliveries. So they had the capacity through Operation Mongoose to make in one of their document mill, they could make all these. They could forge all these ID documents. Of course, Chauncey's in charge of that. He's involved in that because that's his expertise, right? And also Secret Service IDs and badges. So that's going on in their downtown operation in LA, where Chauncey lives. And then out at the airport, in that hangar, they've got their tool and die shop, which can work with weapons and ammunition, et cetera, et cetera. So they've got everything covered that they need. So Twombly issues a memo to Holt and to his team regarding the Secret Service IDs and badges. He says, quote, and of course, we know this because Chauncey saved all these memos, said, quote, number needed, undetermined at this time, but will not be in excess of 15. schedule accordingly. So he's getting his marching orders from Philip Twombly, his boss at the CIA. And he was ordered by Twombly to make a delivery to Miami on November 9th, 1963. This would be right prior to the motorcade that was scheduled to come through Miami with JFK in. Now, later, this motorcade gets canceled due to security concerns. If you remember, a week before that, November 2, Kennedy was supposed to motorcade through Chicago, and that got canceled because of security concerns. And it was an FBI informant named Lee who got wind of an assassination plot. Same MO as Dallas. High buildings, office buildings, motorcade through town. They even had a patsy set up to take the fall who worked in one of the buildings that was right on the route. And they had 4 Cubans there with high-powered rifles, scopes, and they were going to shoot from distance at a moving target. It's all part of the triangular fire team. 3 arrests were made. 2 of the Cubans turned out to be David Morales and Jim Braden, his spotter. And then the patsy was arrested and released because the trip got canceled. Once the White House found out about it, they canceled the trip. Well, a week later, they're supposed to go to Miami. This time, the local authorities did not share with the federal authorities, i.e. the White House or the Secret Service, etc. Well, the security concerns that they had, at least not all specifics, so they still came to Miami, but as residue of what had happened in Chicago and some of the security concerns because of just it being Miami, which was home to all the anti-Castro Cubans who a lot of them, after Bay of Pigs, hated Kennedy. They canceled the motorcade and they just flew in on a helicopter. So the Miami everything that happened in Dallas could have happened and it was supposed to happen in Chicago on November 2, just got canceled. And it could have happened in Miami, but it got modified with the motorcade being canceled and the president coming in and leaving on a helicopter. So Twombly says to Holt, make a delivery to Dallas on November 21st, 1963. So you see here these, they're making alternate plans because they're having to respond in real time to real events that are causing a change in plans. The original plan was Chicago, and that got canceled. And the second plan was Miami, and that's not going to work because the motorcade gets canceled. They had a plan for Tampa, which was right after Miami, and word leaked out, so they had to cancel that. But where nothing got changed and nothing had to be altered was Dallas. And so the emphasis shifts from Miami to Dallas, and the delivery Chauncey is told to make is on November 21st, 1963, the day before the assassination, right? So the question is, well, who is this Philip Twombly? Philip Twombly was Holt's immediate supervisor on behalf of the CIA. So he's kind of like, Holt had his bosses, right? He had Peter Licavoli in Detroit. He had Meyer Lansky in Miami. But once Meyer Lansky introduced Chauncey Holt to the IRC as the controller of the IRC, which was a CIA front, Chauncey's new boss became Philip Twombly. And of course, Philip Twombly and the CIA worked hand in glove with organized crime. And so I'm not saying that he didn't still respond to the orders of his organized crime figures. He did. But oftentimes they were working in concert. They were working together. But the overall boss was the CIA and this man, Philip Twombly. He was the former executive VP for the Caribbean operations of Coca-Cola. And of course, Coca-Cola used to boast that it was the, quote, eyes and ears of the CIA in the Caribbean. And, a lot of these big companies, these big outfits, especially in Central and South America, were infiltrated or controlled by CIA guys, and they performed 2 functions at once. One, they were a private industry making a ton of money, and 2, in order to continue to make that big money, they drove foreign policy back in Washington to make sure that all the resources that they need for their private industry, i.e., sugar mainly, would continue to be available to them, no matter who was in charge down Central South America. If they had to replace them, certain dictators, they would. That was why they were after Castro. That was why they were after Trujillo. That was why they were after all these guys. And so the CIA was sort of this is technically what you call fascism. Fascism is when the government works on behalf of the big companies, the big corporations, and they're married to each other. And the government's doing the bidding of these big corporations, all in efforts to make as much money as possible and spread their power and maintain their monopoly over resources. It's fascism. So all of Holt's funds and orders were coming from Twombly and the CIA. So this is why I say there's been a transition that has taken place. Holt started off all organized crime, and now there's been a transition that's taken place. And though organized crime and the CIA are still working together, his orders, his money to complete his orders, to do the business, to do the work he's supposed to do, it's all coming from the CIA. And his boss is this guy, Phil Twombly. So in May, that was in April. So the letter comes out, or the word comes out that JFK is going to Dallas. And right on the heels of that, Twombly sends his orders to Holt. And you need to make forge these IDs and these badges and make delivery to Miami. Oops, that's not going to work. Let's make the delivery to Dallas on November the 21st, 1963. And a month later, a little less than a month later, May of 63, a letter from Twombly addressed to Jack Moon. Remember, Jack Moon was Holt's CIA alias. It's the one he used the most. And the letter read, quote, "I want you to personally supervise this project and make the delivery yourself to our New Orleans distributor." It was signed Phil. The New Orleans distributor was Guy Bannister. Guy Bannister was the CIA's point man down in New Orleans, and he was sort of in charge of Operation Mongoose as far as its New Orleans part of that operation was concerned. He was the CIA's point man. He was also, we found out in summer of 63, serving as Lee Harvey Oswald's handler, CIA handler in New Orleans. Remember, Oswald will spend the entire summer in New Orleans. And every morning, he would go to the coffee company, check in with Judith Very, and then slip out the back door and go literally 2 blocks away, catty corner, to a little building called the Newman Building, where Guy Bannister was working out the back, ostensibly running a detective agency. But really, that was a front. He was running Operation Mongoose at the back of that building, and he would get his marching orders each day from this Guy Bannister. Some days he'd be helping him and David Ferry work with Operation Mongoose, which was the anti-Castro part of his activities. And some days he'd be working out the front of the building where he had his Fair Play for Cuba organization located, signs and leaflets and things. He would go downtown to Canal Street. He would go to the International Trade Mart, go down to the docks, and he'd hand out these leaflets, et cetera, et cetera. So that was part of the sheep dipping of Lee Harvey Oswald. The guy in charge of all that was Guy Bannister. So here we have a connection where Chauncey Holt is being told to make fake Secret Service IDs and badges and deliver them to Dallas on November 21st, the day before the assassination. And then a month later, he gets a letter from Twombly saying, "I want you to personally supervise this project, make the delivery yourself to our New Orleans distributor." And so he is simultaneously doing 2 things at once. He is making deliveries of something, a project that he's been involved in, to Guy Bannister sometime in the summer. He's been told to do it in May of 63, but he's going to do it a little bit later in the summer. And then, of course, November 21st, he's supposed to be in Dallas with all the fake IDs and badges. So Chauncey Holt this is that Newman building I was telling you about. You can see it's gone now. If you had a chance to go through any of my New Orleans walking tour videos, I went to the location. The building is gone. It's been replaced by another building. But I did the walk from the coffee company, and it's 2 blocks. Everything for Oswald in the summer of '63 in New Orleans was within walking distance. And so, and of course, this is only 2 blocks or 3 blocks from the International Trade Mart, which is right on Canal Boulevard, Canal Street. And that's only 2 blocks from the French Quarter, where Carlos Marcello had his 500 Club, and on it goes. It's all within walking distance. Amazing. So Guy Bannister was the CIA's Operation Mongoose point man. He's running guns to anti-Castro Cubans. Uh, some witnesses said that now, if you look at that building, the front of it, which you see facing, that was it was a little bit of it had a corner entrance, as you can see there. It's right behind the light pole. It's a corner entrance, and it kind of that was the Fair Play for Cuba Committee entrance. That was Lee Harvey Oswald's front. But the back, if you go along the back of the street there by those cars, you get to about the third car there, and right in front of that third car is a back entrance to that building. You can kind of make out a little sign that's hanging from the opening there, and that was Guy Bannister Associates, the private investigator. But that's where Operation Mongoose was being run out of. And of course, internally within that building, there was a door inside separated the front from the back. So you could go in the front entrance, and people from the outside saw you go in the front, would think you'd be in the front of that building. But inside, once you close the door and they can't see you anymore, you could go through that internal door and be in the back, helping out with Guy Bannister. Or you could enter in the back and go through that internal door and end up in the front. In other words, it was essentially one big building. It had 2 entrances, 2 exits, and an internal door that separated the two. The Operation Mongoose used the upstairs and the third floor to store all these weapons. And sometimes David Ferrie would pull up with these trucks in full view. This is right downtown in the heart of the intelligence community located in New Orleans. Right across the street, you had FBI, you had Secret Service around the corner, you had Customs and the Marshals, and you had FBI. All of these, these intelligence operations because it's a port city, so they have a presence down there. And right in full view of all of these people, these government agencies, these intelligence branches, and these national security operations, and these law enforcement officers, you have Operation Mongoose taking place, and David Bannister and all these Cubans are running up and down, filling up these trucks with guns, right? And the trucks are parked right down the street, which tells you that this was a CIA operation with the full blessing of the United States government, which is why they were left alone. And so they're running guns. They're training anti-Castro Cubans out at Lake Pontchartrain. 2 of the Operation Mongoose bases were on Lake Pontchartrain, right on the outskirts of New Orleans, one on each end of the lake. There's pictures of David Ferrie and Lee Harvey Oswald together. Marita Lorenz tells of coming to visit, and also these New Orleans people coming to Miami to visit, among which were Lee Harvey Oswald and David Ferrie. So that's what's going on out of this building. And of course, on the side, Guy Bannister is also serving as Lee Harvey Oswald's handler during the summer of '63. So he's the one giving Oswald all of his instructions. So Chauncey Holt is supposed to make delivery in the summer of '63 to the CIA's point man in New Orleans, and that's Guy Bannister. So the question is, what was the New Orleans project that Holt was instructed by Twombly to personally supervise and make delivery yourself? Well, according to Chauncey Holt, they were supposed to make false ID documents for Lee Harvey Oswald. They were using the same photo with using different aliases, such as Lee Harvey Oswald, Lee Henry Oswald, Leon Osborne, Alec Heidel. And he said, so we're out in LA at the document mill, and we're making all these false IDs documents for this guy, Lee Harvey Oswald, whom they've never met, but they have a picture, and they're putting the same picture virtually on all the different IDs. They even tried to they were ordered to create a communist card. Like like an ID card of the Communist Party. And when Chauncey researched the Communist Party, he found out there was no such thing. The Communist Party did not have an identification card for their members. So he was laughing about it. You can see the interview. Chauncey Holt's talking about it. By the way, in this interview that he gave, where he tells this whole story, 8 days later, he died, Chauncey Holt, which was interesting. But anyway, in this last interview, he's talking about how, well, we just made up an ID card. We just manufactured our own so that he could be found, or this card could be produced at a later date, uh, incriminating this guy Lee Harvey Oswald as a Communist Party member. And if you need evidence, here's his membership card. Anyone who knows anything about the Communist Party knows they don't have a membership card. So this was totally made up. It was totally fabricated. But the American people won't know any better. So that is the project, the special project that Chauncey Holt is involved in, that he was told to personally supervise by his boss, Philip Twombly, and to make the delivery himself to New Orleans. And he's making the delivery to Guy Bannister. Why? Because Guy Bannister is in charge of Lee Harvey Oswald that whole summer. So he is simultaneously, in the summer of 63, handling two separate assignments for the CIA. One, to make fake badges for the Secret Service and fake ID cards for the Secret Service and make delivery of that by November 21st to Dallas, and make all these fake ID documents for Lee Harvey Oswald and make delivery of that in the summer of 63 to their man in New Orleans, Guy Bannister. So something's up, right? So we get to August of 63, and Holt's team has already made delivery of the fake ID for Lee Harvey Oswald. They make a second trip to New Orleans, and it's a road trip. And this time he's doing his other part of the special project, which is to deliver guns and ammo to an organized crime figure in New Orleans. This is not Guy Bannister. This is not even Carlos Marcello. He had a different name. I don't remember his name. But anyway, this is the second part of Holt's big operation out in L.A. One is the document mill. The other is the weapons. So now he's delivering guns and ammo to an organized crime figure in New Orleans. And this is the introduction of a new man to the story. His name is George Reynolds. And there's a couple names here you need to remember as we proceed further. They're going to come into play later. But here's the introduction to him. George Reynolds was a high-level CIA asset operating out of Morgan City, Louisiana. And he had delivered a note or written a note to Chauncey Holt telling him that, quote, he and Leroy Young, who was Reynolds' second in command, he was a weapons expert, a helicopter pilot. He was kind of a soldier of fortune guy. And they went everywhere together. Anyway, they were going to be in New Orleans for about 3 weeks at the same time Chauncey Holt was going to be there, and he wanted to meet. So just as a matter of introducing you to this George Reynolds, who himself is a high-level CIA asset, and he travels everywhere with Leroy Young, his second command, who is, involved in weapons, and he's a pilot just like Chauncey Holt, soldier of fortune, which means he's a mercenary. He goes wherever the money's good. But George's brother, Bob Reynolds, was chief of station at JM Wave, which is CIA Operation Mongoose headquarters down in Miami, Florida. So this is kind of, sometimes these things are almost incestual, the family relationships. We've already talked about Charles Cabell and Earl Cabell. Charles Cabell was the number 2 or 3. And he was the number 2 at the CIA during Bay of Pigs under Allen Dulles. And his brother, Earl Cabell, was the mayor of Dallas, also a CIA asset, So here's another set of brothers, George Reynolds and Bob Reynolds. Frank Belcher was an attorney, and he was one of the most influential lawyers in the state of California. And he was related to Belcher Oil in Texas, which was a known CIA asset. He's married to Reynolds' sister. So the whole Reynolds, I'm trying to paint a picture here of the Reynolds family. All right, you got George Reynolds. He's a CIA asset. He's bringing with him Leroy Young, a CIA asset. His brother is Bob Reynolds, who runs JM Wave, Operation Mongoose down in Miami for William Harvey. And the attorney that represents Reynolds and handles all his business is married. He's family. He's married to Reynolds' sister, and he's a CIA asset related to Belcher Oil in Texas, one of the biggest oil firms there. And Joe Ball is his partner, who works closely with Belcher. He's the president of the California Bar. He eventually ends up being chief counsel to the Warren Commission, uh, brought along by, of course, Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA. So everybody that we're going to be discussing, all these names, are all tied to the CIA. Okay, these are not just random connections here that Chauncey is making. Chauncey's in business with the CIA. He's given orders by Twombly, make deliveries to Dallas, make deliveries to New Orleans. He goes to New Orleans, and the deliveries there to Guy Bannister, who is CIA, on behalf of Lee Harvey Oswald, who is CIA. And he gets this letter from George Reynolds as a CIA asset. He says, me and Leroy, my number two, we're going to meet with you. Later, there's going to be business. Of course, George Reynolds' brother, Bob Reynolds, is the head of the CIA operation, JM Wave down in Miami. Later, there's going to be business that involves attorneys. Frank Belcher, Joe Ball, these are both CIA lawyers. So I hope you see where this is headed here. I get such a kick out of people who say, oh, it's just a couple rogue operators in the CIA. My goodness. All right, so August 9th, 63, he's there making that second delivery, and he's talking with Guy Bannister. And Chauncey tells the story. He's curious about this guy, Lee Harvey Oswald, they did all this work for. That he's never met him. He'd kind of like to meet him. And so Guy Bannister says, well, if you want to meet him, he's over on Canal Street passing out leaflets right now as we speak. So Holt went over to Canal Street, quote, to take a look at him and introduce himself. And as I said, if he's talking to Guy Bannister, he's down at the Newman Building. And the Newman Building is just a few blocks away from Canal Street. So he just walks over there. I did it. It's a short walk. And he sees him, and this is the same night, this is Friday night, August 9th, that Oswald gets arrested on Canal Street. There's this big confrontation between him and Carlos Bernier. It's all manufactured. It's designed to get attention, get the news camera down there, have an arrest record, et cetera, et cetera. And so he gets arrested for his confrontation. They both do. So when Holt comes back to Bannister's building, he says, hey, man, your man just got arrested. Bannister's like, oh, okay. This was the plan. Okay. Bannister doesn't panic, nothing. This was the plan. You got to go down, create a disturbance, disturb the public peace, whatever. Get arrested. Your photo will be in the paper. There'll be an arrest record, and it's going to generate attention. This is all part of the sheep dipping. All right. Here is this pro-Castro guy in an anti-Castro town handing out leaflets, causes the disturbance, gets arrested. Holt, who is not aware that this has all been ginned up, that this is part of a plan, goes back and reports to Guy Bannister, hey, your man just got arrested. Like it was hey, you want to do something about it. Bannister makes plans to go bail Oswald out of jail, but he gets beat by Oswald's uncle, Charles Dutz Moret, who, working for Carlos Marcello, beat him to it. All right, so Oswald gets bailed out by his uncle. And boy, there's a lot you could talk about there with that story with respect to Charles Dutz Moret, his connections, and Oswald's connections through Dutz Moret to Carlos Marcello, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, let's suffice it to say, there were interested parties in New Orleans that wanted to get Oswald out of jail, whether it be the mob or the CIA. Neither, again, two heads of the same coin. They're both interested in getting him out of jail. The mob just beat him to it. So 3 days later, and that was a weekend, so that was Friday, so the 10th, 11th, the Monday following, which is August 12th, Oswald has to go to night court for that arrest. And Holt goes down. He hadn't got to meet him like he planned the previous Friday, so he goes down and he's going to meet him now. And he converses with Oswald for a while, After which Oswald gets fined by the judge and he's released. And that turns out to be Holt's first introduction to Lee Harvey Oswald, who he says was only 23 years, which he was. He was only 23 at the time. He would die when he was 24. I mean, it's unreal the life that Oswald lived in 24 short years. But so that was his introduction to the man that he had been doing all this fake ID stuff for out in LA and made personal delivery. Remember, Philip Twombly said, I want you to personally supervise this project and make personal delivery to our man in New Orleans, our distributor in New Orleans, and then he'll get those IDs to the right people at the right time. This picture here is the picture of Oswald out leafleting, and this particular picture pertains to this next story. 4 days later, August 16th, 1963, this is the following Friday, and Chauncey is still in New Orleans. This time, Oswald's not leafleting on Canal Street, just up and down on the street there. Although he's still on Canal Street, this time he's in front of the International Trade Mart, which happens to be the building where Chauncey Holt was at the time Lee Harvey Oswald is passing out these leaflets. And he's causing a scene like he always did. And a WSDU TV news crew is on the scene. They're filming him. This is the guy that was just arrested recently. He's back out at doing it again, causing a big ruckus. Holt was finishing a meeting inside the Trade Mart with Leroy Young. Remember, Leroy Young was George Reynolds' assistant. And they both come out of the building at the same time into this scene where Lee Harvey Oswald is passing out these leaflets. And he gets caught briefly by a WSDU TV news camera, on camera, walking in the area where Oswald is passing out these Fair Play for Cuba leaflets. So this becomes a problem. And here's the picture. So if you see the far right red circle, that's Chauncey Holt. If you see the middle red circle, that's Leroy Young. And here they are. Chauncey looks like he's walking away. Leroy's kind of looking at the leaflet, and there's Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, this becomes a problem. Twombly gets wind of this, and of course, Guy Bannister gets wind of this, and they're both concerned that Holt had been, their CIA guy had been caught on film in the same proximity of Lee Harvey Oswald during his Fair Play for Cuba leafleting campaign. They're not as worried about Leroy Young. Leroy Young's in the private sector, but Chauncey Holt's full-fledged CIA. If later, after their plans for Lee Harvey Oswald are consummated in Dallas, and there's any kind of investigation that produces a photograph, Lee Harvey Oswald, summer of 63, in the same photograph with a CIA guy, all the rumors about Oswald's CIA connections are going to be, they're going to be regurgitated, so to speak, or given new life. And they do not want a picture of anybody affiliated with the CIA. What they want to tell the American public and the Warren Commission is that they didn't even know who this Lee Harvey Oswald was. They weren't watching him. They had no record of him. They're just as surprised as the rest of us, et cetera, et cetera. So this photo is a problem. And this is where Chauncey starts to realize they have bigger plans for Lee Harvey Oswald than just this leafleting campaign. Warren DeBreeze, pictured here, I couldn't find any earlier photographs of him. This is him later in life. He's a New Orleans FBI agent, acted on Twombly's orders. And in his FBI report, where that photograph is included, misidentified Chauncey Holt in film footage as the, quote, public relations man, not Chauncey. That was the official report, and that satisfied Twombly and the CIA's distributor in New Orleans, who was Bannister, because everyone is going to refer to the FBI report, that's where that photo is. When they're trying to identify the people in that picture, they're going to go by the official FBI report, and getting Warren DeBreeze to misidentify Chauncey Holt as some public relations man, not Chauncey, eliminates the problem. It's not Chauncey in that picture, it's somebody else. And of course, Warren DeBreeze years later admitted, yeah, we changed the identity because they didn't want Chauncey his name or his image or any any kind of connection between him and Lee Harvey Oswald. And of course, this caused a big fuss when they found out that Chauncey Holt's picture was, he got photographed. Guy Bannister yelled at him, and Twombly said something to him. Chauncey said, I couldn't understand. What's all the fuss over Oswald? What's all the fuss about? He said he was an interesting kid, and he says the efforts that were made later by his bosses, Philip Twombly, Guy Bannister, Warren DeBreeze, all these people, to separate him from any associated with Oswald and or the Fair Play for Cuba Committee indicated to Holt that, quote, this guy was important to them. They had plans for him, and the fact that Twombly interceded in this event indicated that Twombly was very aware or cognizant of these plans. So that was an indicator to Chauncey Holt. Remember, if you're a CIA asset, you do what your job is, what your assignment is, and anything else is on a need-to-know basis. And this he wasn't even supposed to have interact. This was probably a mistake on Guy Bannister's part. Guy Bannister probably screwed up when he sent, when Chauncey Holt expressed an interest in meeting the guy he'd made all these forged all these document IDs for. So he sent him over to Canal Street to kind of get a view of him. And, I guess Chauncey was curious. 3 days later, when he was at court, they had a long conversation. And I'm sure you could have probably found a witness in the courtroom, them two talking together, right? But they weren't in a picture, is the point. And then here's that following Friday, he comes out of the Trade Mart, and boom, there's Oswald. And, he feels like he kind of knows the kid now. He's probably felt like that for a while because he's been doing all this work with his picture and all his identification materials, et cetera, et cetera. But now he's actually met him and had a conversation with him. And so he gets photographed coming out, and Leroy Young's with him. And now that photograph's going out on television, and someone's going to have that picture at some point in time when the CIA is claiming they had no knowledge of or no connection to Lee Harvey Oswald. Someone's going to produce that picture later on. It's going to throw a kink in all their cover story. So they had to, and that's when Holt realized whatever this kid is up to, whatever this kid's involved in, whatever plans they have for him, it's a lot bigger than what's going on here in New Orleans. Because all these people with these much higher pay grade than me are moving in heaven and earth to try to separate the CIA from him, even though he's being led around by the CIA. He's being handled by the CIA, even though he is a CIA asset every bit as much as I'm a CIA asset. But they're trying to separate the two. Another big operation that Holt was involved in had to do with Mannlicher Carcanos. This was the summer of '63. Holt received, remember now, he had two operations going on back in LA. One was a document mill for the CIA, and that's what we've been discussing, all these fake IDs and badges, etc. That's mainly what he's involved in. He came to New Orleans for a second delivery, which was weapons. So he's involved in that as well. And he gets an order from a gunsmith in Dallas, a guy named John T. Mason, who had a gun shop in Dallas. And the order was to buy all the existing Mannlicher Carcano rifles at $3 each. And which was interesting. It was a very odd order, Chauncey thought. So what essentially was happening is this gun shop in Dallas is requesting an order of guns, Mannlicher Carcano guns, cheap rifles, from Chauncey Holt and his gun operation out in LA. And what was really interesting about it was the ammunition. The 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher Carcano shells that came with the order had already been fired. Chauncey noticed that they had already, you can tell, I don't know anything about weapons. I'll just stipulate, I don't know anything about weapons. But evidently, those who do can tell if a bullet has already been fired, a shell has been fired. And according to Chauncey, He said these had already been fired like into water or wadding to minimize damage. Like these bullets were being pre-fired by Mannlicher Carcano rifles so that if they're dropped or placed or uh, whatever, if anyone did any testing on them to find out what kind of rifle fired these bullets, they would all come back with the same results. They were fired by a Mannlicher Carcano, which is obviously a very interesting development. And anyway, next, Holt's team was ordered by Philip Twomley to load these shells that have already been pre-fired into .264 Remington cases, which, according to Chauncey Holt, 6.5 millimeter and .264 Remingtons are the same. But the Remington is a lot more, is a quality sniper's rifle. The Mannlicher Carcano is a piece of junk. So Holt's team also preloaded .308 Winchester cases, which are called Mexican loads, necking down to 308 cases. They could fire a 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher Carcano shell. And all of this, so you get the weapons, which is the Mannlicher Carcanos. The order was to buy all the existing Mannlicher Carcano rifles you could get your hands on. And then all of these shells have them pre-fired into water or wadding so they're not damaged in any way. But the markings on them will indicate that they were fired by a Mannlicher Carcano. And then we'll take these 308 Winchesters or we'll take these 260 Remingtons and we'll fire them from these better guns. But when they're tested, it'll say that they were fired by Mannlicher Carcanos because they were fired by Mannlicher Carcanos. And but the Mannlicher Carcano is a piece of junk. But we need all these Mannlicher Carcanos, and we need these shells that were fired from a Mannlicher Carcano because as we know now, subsequent, the patsy that's been set up to take the fall for the JFK assassination is going to have or have ordered, using his alias, Alec Heidel, an alias that Chauncey Holt also put together. So not just the weapon and the shells, but also the ID. The patsy is going to have ordered from a Chicago Klein's gun shop, Klein's Sporting Goods, a Mannlicher Carcano. So, and then finally, all this order is going to be delivered to Mason's gun shop in Dallas. And of course, there's going to be, conveniently, a doppelganger who's going to show up at Mason's gun shop, and he's going to claim to be a man named Lee Harvey Oswald. He's going to try to get his scope sighted and this and that. And so there's going to be a connection to Mason's gun shop, which has the Mannlicher Carcano rifles that they bought from Chauncey and all these shells. And so you're now connecting the patsy to the gun shop and the gun shop to Chauncey and all the CIA, all these Mannlicher Carcanos and these shells. And it's part of the prep work to set up a patsy, that all of the shells are going to come from a Mannlicher Carcano because they're pre-fired or make it look that way. And all these Mannlicher Carcanos are going to be at the Mason's gun shop where the doppelganger is going to go to have his Mannlicher Carcanos scope sighted. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's going on here. These shells are being pre-fired so that it looks like they all came from Mannlicher Carcano. And if you have to drop one at Parkland Hospital, pristine shell, right? The Slayer becomes the magic bullet. When they test it, it came from Mannlicher Carcano, had to be the assassin, right? And who had the only Mannlicher Carcano? According to the record from the Klein's gun shop invoice, Lee Harvey Oswald. So it's interesting that really good rifles like the Remingtons and the the Remington is a very good rifle. And if you're going to use a rifle to snipe something, you would use a Remington, not a Mannlicher Carcano, which is one of the world's worst rifles. But you're setting somebody up. And the people that are going to be involved in this conspiracy that are going to be firing from different buildings may use Remingtons, but they're going to be using bullets that have been delivered by Chauncey Holt, made to look like they all got fired out of the same assassin's gun, the Massacre Carcano. So Chauncey is putting all this together. He's realizing something big is going on in Dallas because it involves this Lee Harvey Oswald. Because I've made all these documents for Lee Harvey Oswald for New Orleans. And then when I got inadvertently photographed with him, the CIA, all my bosses about lost their minds, because they don't want the agency connected to Oswald in any manner, shape, form. And at the same time, I got to make this delivery to Dallas, these guns, these bullets, and also these Secret Service badges and IDs. And he started to put the pieces together. Now, at the time, in real time, he didn't understand the connection of Oswald to Dallas, of New Orleans to Dallas. He will later. But at the time, he thinks they're separate. He just knows Oswald, there's something bigger than New Orleans in the plans for Oswald, because if there wasn't, they wouldn't have made such a big deal about him being photographed with Oswald. So he knew there was something big down the road. And of course, the only thing big down the road that he's aware of is Dallas, because that's what he's currently producing all these guns and ammo for, this gun shop in Dallas, and all these fake Secret Service badges and IDs. So you see here, I hope I've explained it well, or at least somewhat, so that you can understand that Chauncey's role now has changed. He started off doing all this work for the mob, for organized crime. He could partake in forging documents and counterfeiting and all that kind of stuff, helping make money. He was helping with their bookmaking with Meyer Lansky because he was a whiz with numbers. He could pilot. He knew weapons, all that. And then that put him in Meyer Lansky puts him in the CIA through that IRC building, that IRC job as the controller, International Rescue Committee. And next thing you know, he's being ordered about and has a new CIA handler, Philip Twombly, who, first he's in Guatemala, and then he's in Dominican, and then he's in Cuba, and he's helping with Operation Mongoose, and he's creating this document mill and this weapons manufacturer out in LA. And now he's in 63, he's making all these cross-country trips to New Orleans, delivering weapons and also fake IDs and stuff to Guy Bannister, and he meets Oswald during this time, and then he's scheduled to go to Dallas, not just for Secret Service badges and IDs, but now for weapons. And of course, Dallas is where the motorcade's going to happen. It's already that's the other ones have all been canceled, so Dallas has sort of become the epicenter of all things related to this plot that Chauncey is a part of, doesn't realize he's a part of. He will. He'll figure it out. But he's starting to put pieces together that this guy Oswald is a much more important figure to his bosses than he previously thought. And in the next episode, we'll look at what takes place next, because it gets even more amazing than this. The story gets bigger. And this is where we start getting into the three tramps and what Chauncey's role was to be on that day, November 22nd. Remember, he's in Dallas making the delivery on the 21st. Now, as we will find out in the next episode, he actually makes the delivery on the 22nd. He's in Dallas on the 21st, but he's not able to make the delivery until the 22nd, just hours before the goings on in Dealey Plaza. And he is given a new assignment for the event, the disturbance, this Operation Northwoods moment, where there's going to be a disturbance that's going to be laid at the feet. The blame is going to be laid at the feet of the Cubans. Why? What's the point of all this disturbance or whatever's going to happen in Dallas? And he's not aware of an assassination plot. He's aware of a disturbance that's being planned as a false flag to blame Cuba. Why? To sabotage JFK's peace outreach to Castro. It's all about sabotaging the peace. And so that's what he thinks he's a part of. He thinks he's a part of creating this disturbance. And, it's not going to be, he has no idea it's going to be an assassination. He has an idea it's going to be a disturbance. It might be a demonstration. It might even be shots taken, but he's not heard yet anything to indicate to him that this is an assassination plot. And so he's just going along with it. The only thing that's sticking in his mind at this point is that this guy Oswald is important to whatever's happening, and he's a major player because if he wasn't, his bosses wouldn't have gotten involved in New Orleans. All right, so that is episode 2, and hope you enjoyed that. This is Christmas week, so I wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.